Keeping a collection of plants happy and thriving can be a tricky thing. It's taken a lot of trial and error on my part to get my collection to where it is now, and I just wish I knew the tips I'll share with you in this video 5 years ago. It would have saved me a lot of heartache and a lot of arguing with my green pals, believe me. So coming up is the hidden truth about what might be lurking in your plant soil that might be killing them, 8 common watering mistakes you're probably making, the one big regret I still think about to this very day, and 6 things that most people get wrong about their plants, as well as a bunch of other awesome tips and tricks to help you become the hero of your house. So let's crack on. Much of the pain, guilt and anguish we experience as plant parents all stem from the mistakes we often make when buying the plant in the first place. First, you'll want to avoid anything that has the word Calathea on the tag. Only joking, of course, sort of. If you're an absolute beginner, then you'll want to start with something that is pretty easy going, like a monstera, a peace lily or a snake plant. And Calathea is not easy going, my plant friend. Trust me, I know from experience. Crispy brown leaves and Calathea go together like peas and carrots. It's something even the most experienced growers struggle with, as well as me. The best advice I can offer here is to hunt out a couple of plants that tickle your fancy and then do a quick Google search to see how fussy they are. I usually just type in the name of the plant and easy care and see what comes up. If the results come back with things like, this plant needs specific care, then alarm bells should be ringing in your head. If you like a challenge, then go for it by all means. But if you want an easy life like me, then move on to the next one. I think I've chosen my plant. I'm going to choose this mosaic plant, £7.50, which I think is a Fittonia. I've already got one of these in my house. I think I've got one of these already in my house and it seems to do quite well. So I know this one should do the same. I had a quick look on Google to see how easy it is to care for. It's pretty easy to care for. They say they like high humidity, which I'm not sure whether I agree with or not, because mine seems to do okay, not particularly high humidity. But the health of the plant is pretty good. All the leaves look in good condition, no yellowing, no browning. Doesn't look like the plant's on death's door or anything like that. So it looks like a good healthy plant to buy. It's in budget, it's easy going, so I think this is the one I'm going to purchase. Now that I've found a green buddy that doesn't sound like it's going to give me too much grief, and it's in my rather limited budget, I now need to do the most important step. Check for pests. So before you go and pay for your plant, you want to give it a quick check over some pests. You probably won't be able to be 100% sure that the plant hasn't got pests, but you give it a good look over and see any obvious damage. So you want to look for kind of speckly leaves, particularly underneath. This is where the potential insects like thrips and spider mites have been munching away on the leaves. So if it's looking a bit speckled underneath, then you want to avoid that plant and move on to the next one. It doesn't look like this has got that. Looking at the underside of the leaves, they all look pretty healthy, as you'd expect to see. You also want to look for webbing on the underside of the leaves where it meets the petiole particularly. Very fine webbing, that's an indication of spider mites, where they kind of spread over the plant and use their webbing to munch on the leaves. Something like that's happening on this plant. And also any specks of black or red or anything like that, or the indication of thrips and spider mites, which doesn't look like is the case on these leaves. I'll give it a check over. You can also look in the soil as well for any fungus gnats. Now there probably will be fungus gnats in most plant pots because they are the bane of everyone's lives. But if you give it a little disturb on the front, on the top, and if you see anything popping about, little flea-like insects, then they are fungus gnats. So you can have a quick look at the soil of your plant. I've had a look at this one. It doesn't look like there's too much activity going on. So I think my checks are over and I'll take it to the cashier and pay for it. I'm pretty happy with my purchase then. Doesn't seem like it's going to be too much of a nightmare. The foliage looks pretty decent. I can't see anything too sinister under the leaves and in the soil, and I'm getting reasonably good value for money. I'm excited. So, you'll be pretty excited about your new purchase and you'll want to bring him home and plonk him straight onto the windowsill to meet all his new friends, right? Well, this can actually land you into all sorts of bother, so hold your horses. It's well worth doing yet another check for pests. I know it sounds OTT, but you can never be too careful when it comes to pests. The last thing you want is for the little suckers to jump ship and invade your existing collection. Disaster. And it's very tricky doing a thorough check when in the store with all those eyes on you. You get some funny looks, believe me, and you can easily miss the little gits. You know, most of them are pretty small after all. I bought this plant back from the shop. I've been having a look at it for the last 5 to 10 minutes to see if there's any naughty pests on here, and I can't see anything. So I've had a good look at the underside of the leaves, especially where the petiole meets the leaf or the stem meets the leaf, because that is where they tend to hang out, especially spider mites. And it's a good idea to get a light. You can use the light off your phone and you can shine it on the other side of what you're looking at, and it kind of shows up the very fine wispy webbing. So that's a good little tactic to use, and you can also use it to look at all the underside of the leaves. So if you do have a problem, you want to isolate the plant and you want to treat it with an insecticide or something to get rid of the bug, depending on which one you have. So I'm now pretty happy that there are no pests on this guy. I can put him in his new home, right? Well, I would actually wait. This step is optional, but I highly recommend it. I always isolate new plants for at least a week. I know I sound like a madman, but I hate pests and I want to make sure there is no risk of them spreading. Who knows what eggs and whatnot might be on the plant and have yet to hatch and spread and conquer. We don't want a plantocalypse on our hands with bugs jumping easily from ship to ship, do we? Like I said, it's optional, but I keep them in the corner of a room like a naughty child for a week or two, checking them over every day to see if anything rears its ugly head. Now that I'm reasonably happy there are no hidden suckers lurking under the leaves or in the soil, we can now get him ready for his new life in his new home and for a glorious friendship to blossom. I now look under the bonnet and check out the health of the engine. Roots, that is. Plants that come fresh from the store should be in decent soil and have healthy roots, but sadly the world isn't a perfect place, so it's well worth checking them out. Pull its trousers down and have a look or even fondle of his private parts. He won't mind. No need to go mad and disturb all the soil and break apart the root ball. He's fairly delicate down there after all. You're just seeing if there is room for roots to grow, that they look healthy and plump. We have a very healthy plant here because lots of soil for the roots to grow into. It's not root bound whatsoever. You can see all the finer roots have reached to the bottom of the plant, which is quite good, away from the crown. And the roots are nice and beige, which is exactly what you want. You don't want any black roots in here because that is an indication of root rot, and you'd want to get rid of that going forwards. But yeah, really healthy plant by the looks of things underneath in the soil. Loads of room for these roots to continue growing for probably at least another year. You might think you need to get the plant out of the soil he came in and pop it into a nice fresh mix, but honestly I wouldn't bother. Unless the soil absolutely pongs and is a bit of a dog's dinner, I'd leave it alone. He will happily live in the soil he came in until he outgrows the pot and is ready for an upsize. I'd avoid giving any fertiliser for at least the first month. Sounds harsh to starve him like this, but the reason is pretty simple. You have no idea when the grower last fertilised him. It could have been the day you bought him, so to feed him again would soon fatten him up, and that's not good. Yellow leaves and drooping are the issues you might face, or even plant death. Not pretty. Be safe and wait at least a month. Even if it has been a while since he was last fed, he isn't going to starve, he'll be just fine. Before I go about finding a spot for him, which has some crucial steps I'll cover in a jiffy by the way, I always add one of these to the pot. What on earth are these ugly things, I hear you cry? These are fungus gnat catchers. These are the stickiest things you'll ever touch, and sometimes annoyingly so. They always stick to my hand whenever I brush past them, but needs must. They're yellow because gnats are dumb enough to be attracted to yellow and will fly into it, the daft things. And they can't get off, so they will die a slow death. Sounds pretty grim actually. Oh well. Fungus gnats are the most persistent pest, and having one of these in the pot does two things. It keeps a lid on the population by catching the adults, but it also tells you how bad a problem you have. And this is crucial. If you've caught thousands on the card, then you've got a big problem that needs sorting. Leave it and you'll soon be overtaken and you'll want to give up on life, let alone plants. We're about ready to finally pop him in his new home and let him settle into his new surroundings. But where should he go? For this, you need to understand what light he wants. This is crucial. All plants have different light needs. Some need direct sun, like succulents and cacti, but most indoor tropical plants will require bright indirect light. Don't worry too much about what that means. It's just a catch term for not allowing direct sun rays to touch the leaves. The plant basically wants to be in the shade from the sun, otherwise the leaves will burn. I.e., don't leave him to roast on a south-facing window all day if you're in the northern hemisphere. A quick Google search will tell you what the ideal light for your plant is, so it's well worth doing this. So the tag of this guy that came with the plant says that it needs a bright spot out of direct sunlight. So I don't always trust these tags because quite often they don't even give you the name of the plant. But this one does, mosaic plant, Fittonia. So I have done a little bit of research on it online. It tends to back that up. So it does need a bright spot, which I think is about 800 foot candles minimum. More on that in a little bit. It doesn't want the direct sunlight to touch the leaves because it will turn them crispy brown. Not a massive issue, but if you keep doing it, if you keep it on there on a south-facing window in the northern hemisphere, for example, then you will get lots of crispy brown leaves and you'll end up with nothing. So I need to find a spot that is nice and bright where direct sun doesn't touch the leaves, which is a little bit tricky. So now it's all about finding the right spot in your home. But how on earth do you know if your home gets low, medium or bright light? Well, for this I have this trusty light meter. Don't be too alarmed, it's pretty cheap and there are even apps on your phone you can use that do the same thing, although a little less accurately. I bought this fella a year ago and I love it. So this guy, my light meter, has saved my bacon because I now know exactly how much light is coming into my home. And it turns out not a lot because I measure the light coming into my house in various spots and it's always quite low. So this measures in lux and foot candles. I use foot candles. I think they're more or less the same measurement really. Anything below 500 foot candles is considered low light, so that's not great for your plants. And anything 500 to 1000 is medium light, which is good for your plants. Above 1000 is high light, which is probably quite unlikely in most spots in your home unless you're right next to a window, which is this spot here. So I'm going to put this plant on this window shelf right here next to this window. This is an east facing window, and during a bright day or clear day during spring and summer, I know that it gets about 1000 foot candles, which is great, so all these plants love that. But on an overcast day like today, it is getting about 300 foot candles, which is lower light, so not great. But that's pretty much the best I can do in this house unless I was to put it under a grow light. So this spot, it will get direct sun, but it should be able to tolerate it because I live in Sheffield in the north of the UK and we don't get much direct sun. If you're struggling to find the perfect spot for your new guy, then don't worry too much. If it's not got bright enough light most of the time, it just means it won't grow as vigorously as it could. It will still most likely be perfectly happy in your home. And if you really want to get the best out of your plant, then consider adding a grow light. I've got 4 Sansi grow lights in my home, which allows me to have plants in dark spots in my house, and you can use my code for a 15% discount in the description to this video. The most important thing to remember when it comes to watering your plant is that you can't give it too much. Yes, that's right. Contrary to what you might have heard, it's impossible. No way, don't leave the video just yet, hear me out. You need to grab your plant and drench that sucker until you run out of water. Do it as many times as you like and the plant will just lap it up and say thank you very much. Yes, you can even do this with snake plants and succulents. I challenge you to try and give yours too much. You might be there a while though, so best not to take me up on that. Look, you can even do this. I get so many comments on my videos from worried plant parents fretting about how much water to give, and I completely get it. We're doting parents after all and want what's best for our little darlings. You hear about the horrors of overwatering from every corner of the internet, and sometimes it feels like you need a PhD in botany just to know what the correct thing to do is. But once you know the few basic things I'm sharing in this video, it's really not too taxing. In any case, I was this exact same worried plant parent just a few years ago, but once I came to the realization that overwatering is to do with frequency rather than quantity, my mind was at ease. The crux of it is this: your plant hates having wet feet. In other words, it doesn't like to be sat in soggy soil all the time. This means if you're over generous with the watering can and water every 3 days, you'll have a mutiny on your hands. They'll down tools and make a mockery of you behind your back. Chances are the soil will constantly be wet, and this is the perfect breeding ground for a rot to take hold of the roots. And it's not the water that does the damage. Plants can live in water after all, or hydroponically if you want to get fancy. Nope, it's actually the lack of oxygen. Soggy soil deprives the root ball of oxygen, and the roots start to turn black and mushy and die off. Not pretty. And this has a fancy name: anaerobic soil. Look it up if you can be bothered. This is why plants can live in water. There's no soil messing things up, suffocating the roots of oxygen. Change the water every week and you're fine. All of this is to say that you're probably worrying about the wrong thing. Your focus should be on determining when the soil is ready for water and not how much you are giving it. It's really that simple. I say this all the time in my videos to the point where most of you probably feel like you're part of some sort of cult, but water your plant when the soil is dry. Repeat after me: water when the soil is dry. Repeat this in your head as you're trying to go to sleep. Of course, there are tons of ways you can do this. Most people's favourite method is to give your friend a good fingering, so to speak, and if that's working for you, then have at it. I find my fingers to be untrustworthy at the best of times though, so I put my faith in something else. You can use a good old chopstick or popsicle stick if you so desire, but I find that you're waiting around a bit too long for results. I mean, I can't be doing this for every single plant. I've got 2 kids constantly nagging me for my attention. Now, I'm on a crusade to get every single plant parent in the world to own a moisture meter, because they're quick, they're easy, and they're reliable. And if you haven't got one yet, you're missing out. Plus, I get a few pennies for every purchase off my Amazon page. Go on, it's linked below. Using the moisture meter means no more guessing, which equals no more fretting, which equals no more sleepless nights. Not having sleepless nights over your plants? Weirdo. Anyway, stick it in and only water when it reads dry. That applies to pretty much all plants too. Ficus, pothos, philodendron, monstera, succulents, you name it. Even calatheas need the soil to dry out. People say they like moist soil, but believe me, they hate wet soil more. I try and aim to water them when the meter is just going into the dry zone. The school of thought seems to be that you need to do a background check on all your plants to know how much water they need, but honestly, this extra work isn't really necessary. Always wait for the soil to dry out. I can't think of many exceptions to this apart from bog-loving plants like the meat eaters of the world. To labour the point just a little bit more, I'd stay clear of litting plant apps telling you when to water your little green friends. I mean, how does it know how dry the soil of your little guy is? It's guessing and potentially leading you down the garden path. Don't get me wrong, they can be useful for reminding you when to fertilise, etc. But for watering, I'd just use your own judgment. Okay, then get a moisture meter, silly. While you're there, why not sign up to my free newsletter linked below, where I send out weekly tips and tricks to help you become a houseplant boss. Go on, join the party. It's free. To stop your plants from dying a slow, torturous death from root rot, you need to keep them in good free draining soil. What on earth is free draining soil, I hear you cry? Well, it's soil with lots of air pockets that allows excess water to flow freely out of the drainage holes in the bottom of the pot. The aim of the game with plant care is to not have excess water lingering around like a fart in an elevator. A heavy soil, such as clay from your garden, or compost is not free draining. Water cannot easily escape and stays in the soil for too long. If there's roots in there, then it's good night Vienna. So what can we do to stop this nightmare from happening? You can either amend your own mix with additives like perlite and bark, or you can buy a decent ready-made mix from somewhere like Cybertanica. And perlite really is plant gold. It's super lightweight, and when added to soil makes it as fluffy and light as a freshly baked scone. Yes, scone, not scone. You can even stick your plants in just perlite as long as you feed them correctly, which does sound somewhat appealing. Not just for the root health, but also those pesky gnats can't make hay in perlite, and I'd do anything to keep them out of my house. I mentioned Cybertanica, and you can bag yourself a 10% discount on all their soil with the link in the description. They've got a mix for pretty much all types of plants, and I'm a big fan. Even with the best, most free draining soil in the world, you'll find that eventually it becomes pretty compressed over time. Have a look at a plant you've had for a couple of years. Try and poke a stick in the soil. I bet it won't go in very easily. And don't worry, I'm not judging the fact you haven't changed the soil in a while. We're all busy people. But anyway, this situation can spell trouble for your loved ones. Don't worry though, there's a couple of things you can do. I like to periodically poke a stick in and give everything a jiggle. Loosens everything up nicely and averts any compaction disasters. And don't worry too much about breaking the roots. They can take a little bit of damage here or there, and as long as you don't go mad, they'll regrow and survive. Another top tip is to bottom water. I know it's not for everyone, but I swear by it. My theory is that because water isn't being poured over the top of the soil, it doesn't compact as much. I think that makes sense anyway. And in any case, watering is a nice even way to get moisture to all areas of the root ball. Moisture gets wicked up through the soil slowly, and no parts of the soil get missed. This is key. The next time you top water a thirsty plant and you think you've given it enough, try pulling its trousers down to see if there are any dry patches. You might be surprised. And if you're worried about how much to give, then here's my rule of thumb. Add about a third of the volume of the pot of water at a time and be on your merry way. If it drinks it up in 2 minutes flat, then you've got a very thirsty plant, so give it some more. If it doesn't drink it all straight away, check the following day and discard the excess. Your plant will be fine sat in a bit of excess water overnight. It's the prolonged pain of having wet feet that does the damage. If you're really struggling with your soil and it seems like it's taken an eternity for it to dry out, then the best piece of advice I have for you is to either change your soil supplier or start using terracotta pots. The porous nature of terracotta means water wicks from all sides and dries everything out so much quicker. I actually don't do this, you see, because my soil is decent and doesn't hold on to too much water, and I've had problems with plants not getting enough H2O in them because of how porous the pots are. But if you're in trouble, then it's worth a look. Terracotta pots do always come with drainage holes, and they are a plant guy or gal's best friend. Stick a plant in a pot without drainage holes and you're condemning it to death. Not unless you're a watering pro. You need that water to flow out of the bottom so it doesn't linger in the soil for too long and cause all those root rot problems I've already mentioned. Check out my video where I watered my plant every day for 30 days as proof. Things went better than expected, and I put that down to the drainage holes. A slightly more niche concern some folks have is knowing what time of day is best to water. After breakfast, second breakfast, 11s, luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, supper, middle of the night. If this thought has crossed your mind, or you're getting up at 5 AM to dote on them, then there's really no need to. Any time is fine. This probably comes from the gardening world where it's usually best practice to water in the morning so the plants are hydrated for the heat of the day and not getting water sat on them overnight from evening watering, but that's not an issue for indoor plants. Water the soil and not the leaves. Do it anytime and you're good to go. You might also be concerned about watering in winter. I mean, surely they don't need as much water in the winter, right? Well, yes, they're not growing as much in most cases, and therefore won't be transpiring etc. as much, but it's a moot point really. Again, check the soil and water when it's dry. This mantra applies just as much in the winter as the summer. There is potentially a hidden problem in the soil of your plants that is absolutely wrecking their growth. I don't want to sound too alarmist, But if your plants are seemingly never growing even though they're in great light and you fertilise every 2 weeks, then it could be because of this very problem. But don't worry my plant friend, I'll tell you what it is, how you can easily identify it, and the simple steps you can take to correct it so you can finally have thriving plants in your home. So what's the problem then? Well, plants are fairly simple in that they require 3 things to thrive: light, water, and nutrients. That's it. Get those 3 things correct and we're well on our way to having the best plants in the neighbourhood. If just one of those things is off, then we're not going to see the growth we're looking for. Light and water are fairly simple. Well, compared to what's coming up anyway. You know, stick them near a window so they get a good view of the sky, and water when the soil is dry and we're in a good spot. It's the third part of the equation, nutrients, that can be problematic, and I bet you won't have come across this hidden issue before. It's blown my mind, let me tell you. It's all to do with whether conditions are right in the soil for the roots to be able to draw up nutrients. We all know nutrients are vital for a plant to be able to grow to its full potential, of course. They need their Weetabix in the morning just as much as you and me. If things are off, then the plant simply won't be able to digest the nutrients no matter how much fertilizer you give it, and growth will be stunted. I'm talking about pH. Now, the importance of soil pH is something that's pretty new to me. I had no idea just how important it was until quite recently, and it's something every plant owner needs to know because it's caught me off guard and I wish I knew about it sooner. I won't go too far into the science, namely because I'm absolutely no scientist, but here are the bits you need to know. Imagine you're in the midst of creating a spectacular birthday cake. In this culinary masterpiece, one of the most vital ingredients you'll use is baking powder. Think of it like this: too little baking powder, and instead of a marvellous fluffy birthday cake, you're left with a flat, dense pancake. On the flip side though, too much baking powder creates a puffy mess that collapses in on itself, resulting in a disappointment rather than a delight. The pH levels in the soil of your plants works in a similar way. Just as in baking, when there's an imbalance in pH, your plants may struggle to thrive as intended. Too much or too little pH in the soil can wreck their growth, just like the wrong measure of baking powder can change the outcome of your birthday cake, leaving your plants unable to rise to their full healthy potential. Now, everything has a pH value, from water to vinegar to bleach. It measures whether something is acidic or alkaline, with 1 being the most acidic and 14 being the most alkaline. Distilled water, for example, is neutral, slap bang in the middle at 7. Lemon juice is of course very acidic, and bleach would be alkaline. Now here's the important thing to know. Houseplants want to live in soil that is neutral or slightly acidic. The ideal range is between 6 and 7.5. If the soil is below 6 or above 7.5, then the nutrients you provide in the form of fertilizer will not be available for the roots. They effectively ignore it, and it's like you've never gave them the baking powder they need to rise. I know, it's crazy, right? You could be diligently fertilizing your plants every 2 weeks like a devoted plant parent, completely oblivious to the fact that they're not using any of it. The result? Stunted growth, leaf fading and yellowing, brown edges, and all the self-doubt that comes with it. Every plant parent's worst nightmare. This is actually called nutrient lockout in the trade, and it's something the pros monitor to keep their plants in tip-top shape. Now, all of this was a bit of a red pill moment for me, I must admit.
Take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
My plants have always been pretty slow growing. I just simply put that down to the poor light in my home here in cloudy Sheffield. But what if the problem was in my soil all this time? My poor plants might have been suffering all this time without me knowing. No wonder they look like they hate me. If only they could talk, eh? So how on earth can you find out whether your soil is too acidic or too alkaline? Well, there are a few options, some of which are more reliable than others, but also less convenient. The option you choose will be based on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. The The best, most reliable way is to take a few samples of your soil and send it off to a lab to be analysed. This will tell you exactly what's going on and will be 100% accurate. The problem is, of course, who wants to be doing that for all their plants? I mean, the soil of each of them would be slightly different, won't it? I guess you could do a selection to give you a steer on what's going on though. The other option is to go full DIY. That usually comes in the form of a home soil testing kit or a probe you can stick into the soil. The soil testing kit will be the second most reliable and the probe will be the least reliable, unless you fork out for a proper fancy scientific one, but they do cost a pretty penny. Now I obviously chose the cheap probe because, I'm a bit of a cheapskate. But soil probes aren't useless though. They're probably not the most accurate, but they will give you a steer on whether your soil is very acidic or very alkaline. The Gardening in Canada YouTube channel has a very good video on how useful these things are. It's well worth a look. So, I've been probing all my plants like a madman since I got it, and it turns out my soil is borderline too acidic. I'm getting a reading of between 6 and 7, but it is normally on the lower end towards 6. Now, houseplants tend to prefer it on the slightly acidic side, so I guess I'm on the right side of the spectrum at least. If I was consistently around 7.5 or above, then I'd be more concerned. So what on earth is causing the soil of our beloved houseplants to become too acidic or too alkaline? There's actually a whole host of things, one of which can take the lion's share of the blame. Completely innocent and naturally occurring things below the surface of the soil can be altering pH like a menace. Pine needles, for example, can make soil more acidic due to the natural acidity. So if your soil mix contains pine needles for drainage, you might want to look at that. The bacteria and microbes working to decompose bits of plant matter can also make things more acidic or alkaline. So not much you can do about that, I guess, apart from go semi-hydro. But the primary cause of this is the good old innocent water you are using. Yes, chances are the water coming out of your tap won't be perfectly neutral. Here in the UK, our water tends to be on the more acidic side, whereas in North America it tends to be more alkaline. Generally, hard water usually increases alkalinity, while soft water can contribute to acidity. Now I've got these nifty pH water test strips that I dip into my tap water and it gives me a reading of the pH level. As you can see, my water is on the slightly acidic side. And this makes perfect sense because Yorkshire water is very soft. I don't need to add salt to my dishwasher, which is very handy. Continually watering with slightly acidic water will make the soil slightly acidic over time. Makes sense, right? It is well worth getting yourself these strips so you at least know the pH of the water you're giving your plants. It's pretty eye-opening, let me tell you. And this is particularly true if you're semi-hydro. So what do you do when you've tested your soil and it's not in the Goldilocks zone? Like I said, water is the biggest contributor to soil pH, so the easiest solution is to adjust your water. But how? Thankfully, there are simple to use products on the market that will raise or lower your pH. I'm not sponsored or anything, but you essentially add a drop or two to your water, test the pH until it reads neutral or slightly acidic, and be on your merry way. But I'm actually going to hold off on altering my water for now because it looks like I'm just about in the safe zone, but I'll be continuing to monitor with my trusty meter. This plant is clearly very root bound. I mean, just look at those roots. They've dug a tunnel out of their cell, broken free of the prison walls and are now sprinting furiously to freedom. You forgot about the perimeter walls, guys. You're not going anywhere. You're probably thinking this plant is on death's door, right? As well as, why is this guy talking about prison breaks? Well, friend, no. Its demise is not imminent. Not at all, actually. This Tradescantia, or Purple Pellida, will continue to live happily as it is for another few months. Probably. Provided I do the right things for it, of course. What even is root bound? Or pot bound? I don't know. You choose. And how can you tell when it's happened? I mean, where's the line between it being perfectly fine to being so root bound that it needs to be repotted? Basically, it just means there is no longer enough room in the pot to support more root growth. That's it. Clear as mud, right? Okay, let's peel the onion a bit more. This usually happens when the pot is majority roots and the soil has done a disappearing act. Seriously, where does the soil go? Do the roots eat it somehow? One of life's mysteries, for me at least anyway. If you know the answer, then help a brother out. Now, plants are sneaky in that they fill the outside of the pot with roots first, and exit out of the drainage holes at the bottom second, before filling in the centre. They love to sprawl and spread like intrepid explorers conquering an indigenous land. I'm not here to judge. So, a plant can look super pot bound from the outside, but if you were to go exploring in the middle of the root ball, there may still be a decent amount of soil, so panic over. Not as pot-bound as it first appeared. There is still room for roots to continue exploring. You see this all the time with plants that have thick roots like the beloved Monstera. We tend to repot Monsteras too soon. It's not a massive problem of course, it doesn't harm the plant to repot too early. It's just a pain in the bum getting soil all over your kitchen repotting when you probably didn't need to. Am I right or am I right? A dead giveaway for when you've left it too long though is the crunchiness of the pot. Have a listen. A good technique then is to give it the feels. Squeeze the plastic pot. Go on, it won't mind. It might actually like it. A normal plant will have some give. The more root bound it becomes, the harder and crunchier it will feel. This Tradescantia feels super hard and very dense. Like I've got rocks in there. I can tell there is a lot of thick roots inside. Plus the fact it's got a ton of roots coming out of the bottom is a bit of a giveaway. But actually, like I said, this can be the plant sending you down the rabbit hole. The roots just love to escape out of the drainage holes the first chance they get. Doesn't necessarily mean it's significantly pot bound. So those are the physical signs of root boundedness. Root boundedness, is that a word? It is now. What about the emotional signs? Emotional signs? What are you talking about? I'm talking about when it's looking depressed even though you pampered to its needs with love and water only a couple of days ago. You know, the leaves get all moody and droopy like you're neglecting him even though you tend to him every bleeding day. Ah, that's the classic sign that your plant is ready to be upgraded from a terrace to a semi-detached. Essentially, the kids are all grown up and there's no room to swing a cat in the house anymore. That means there's no soil left in the pot to hold on to moisture, so the plant gobbles it up straight away and needs more only a few days later. You can feel like you're giving it a drink 3 or 4 times a week. And then there is yellowing leaves. Yes, nothing sends a plant parent into panic more than yellowing leaves. Again, this happens simply because of the lack of soil and therefore nutrients available for the leaves to draw up through the roots. It's running on empty. The point is, these problems tend to happen when you seriously neglected the plant for a very long time. We're talking years and years. There's simply no soil left in the pot. What I'm saying is you've got plenty of time on your side. Give a root bound plant the water it needs and feed every couple of weeks during spring and summer and you should stave off these problems. Now, my Tradescantia here is pretty root bound, but it's not been drooping and I'm not having to water every 3 days despite how it looks. The leaves look pretty much as good as you're going to get from a Tradescantia. I know it looks a bit of a mess, but they're not yellowing anyway. The bare stems you can see near the base aren't because of the roots. No, it's because it's not able to spread and conquer like they do in the wild. Look, if these things are happening to you and it's getting out of control, then yes, feel free to repot your little friend. But it's not always necessary. A plant won't die as long as you give it the water and nutrients it needs. Okay then. I guess it is time I did actually repot this guy, even if I do really want to just lob him in the bin. I'm running out of patience with Tradescantias, you see. I know it's not their fault, I guess. They just hate living in a pot, and I don't blame them. I'd rather be set free on a field compared to living in a cell. Right then, these roots coming out of the bottom. I best be really careful and poke them back through the holes so they don't break off and kill the plant, right? Nah, too time consuming. Grab your scissors and chop away. Chop like you've never chopped before. It's not harming the plant in any way, shape or form. In fact, it's a good idea to give the roots a little trim. It gets rid of old tired roots that are prone to rot and replaces them with new, vibrant, sexy roots. Oops, did I just say that out loud? Now, you might be wondering to yourself, Mr. Sheffield, when can we actually do this? Surely we can't do it in the depths of winter, right? Well, let me put your mind at rest. Do it anytime you want, plant friend. Roots grow all year as long as temperatures are above 12 degrees Celsius, so unless you're living in an igloo, you're fine. So next, you want to get the plant out of the pot and assess the damage. The roots on this guy look pretty good. Nothing too black and rotting as far as I can see. You can give them a sniff at this point if you really want to see if you can smell anything suspicious. Anything that is looking tired and potentially on a downward spiral to rot, you should cut off. And don't be shy here, the plant really won't bat an eyelid. A cheeky little pro tip for repotting a plant is to wait for the soil to dry out a bit before doing so. Not like I've done here though. A bit, I said, a bit. It shouldn't be like sand in there. If you can't get the plant out of the pot easily, then squeeze it to loosen it. If that doesn't work, then try sitting on it or something. Still won't budge, then you might just have to give it the Edward Scissorhand treatment and cut it out. At least these pots come free with the plant you buy. Unless you're buying fancy orchid pots, in which case, ooh, check you out. Now, most advice out there says that you need to untangle all of the roots fully so that they can learn to grow into the new surroundings. I say roots aren't that stupid. Sure, a light untangling of the really tied up parts can help, but don't go too mad. It's not worth the time and effort. Now, the pot. You'll have heard you should only go 1 or 2 sizes bigger than the old pot, but honestly this depends on the state of your plant. You could be spending all this time repotting your plant only to find it's root bound again in a couple of months. If you want to go a bit bigger, then go for it. Just remember, the bigger the pot, the longer it takes to dry out, so careful watering is required. That means letting the soil dry out before watering again, and not watering with a teaspoon. Take a look at my Monstera. Big and handsome, isn't he? I repotted him a couple of years ago from a pretty tiny pot into this giant one, and look, he's getting on just fine. Love you, big boy. He's my pride and joy. I've got just the pot for my Tradescantia. Big enough for the roots to explore, but not so big the soil stays wet and causes all the problems that brings. And hopefully small enough for a decorative pot I can stick into it so it doesn't look so ghastly. And if you're a terracotta lover, then consider glazing the inside and outside first. Means you won't be having to water every single day. Fill your chosen pot with a nice base layer of your favourite potting mix. Whatever soil you use, make sure it's free draining to keep root rot at bay, but also retains enough water for the roots. Alright then, pop your plant in and backfill around the sides. Give the pot a taparoo and a bounceroo to fill in those pesky air gaps, and make sure to fill to the same level as the crown of the plant. Don't bury him in soil, that'll suffocate him and we don't want that. Give it a cheeky press to firm everything in place, but don't go mad or anything, he still needs to breathe. Once you're happy, drench it till it's sufficiently drowned, and then plonk it back where you got it. I quite like to leave him sat in his own juices for up to half an hour while I clean up, so all the nooks and crannies are nice and wet. Oof, sounded hideous that, didn't it? And look, he's good as new, isn't he? Yeah, I lost a few stems along the way, but hey, he'll grow back. They always grow back. I've been a loving plant parent for a few years now, and there is one mistake I've made that still irks me to this very day. Honestly, it keeps me up at night. If I hadn't been making it for so long, then I'd have much nicer plants now that I could show off to all my friends and family and make it look like I'm the original G when it comes to indoor plant care. Sadly though, that ship has sailed. The problem, my plant friend, is a lack of support. No, not emotional support, silly. I'm talking physical support. Plants don't have feelings, do they? Anyway, as our indoor green buddies get older, bigger and wiser over the years, they need a Zimmer frame just as much as your 95-year-old granddad does to keep them upright and not sprawled all over the floor. The problem is though that I would see that they were struggling with their long arms and legs flopping all over the place, and I'd slap a bamboo stick or moss bowl behind them and tie them up using a bit of gardening string. This is all wrong. On many levels, and a surefire way to have a plant that ends up looking like this. He won't appreciate me singling him out like this, but just look at him. A straggly mess, and the pole I've used to support him is just not helping. Sorry mate, it's not you, it's me. I've done it all wrong and you've suffered the consequences. This is my philodendron lemon and lime, by the way. The right way to do it is like this. Just look at Mr. Monstera adansonii here. Normally the ugly younger brother to the ever popular Deliciosa, and often in his shadow, but not in this case. He's every bit as glorious as his older sibling, and I really am a proud plant dad. So what on earth is the problem then, I hear you wail? Well, we all know that plants such as pothos, philodendron and monstera all need something to climb up if we're going to get the best out of them. They mature as they get older and have a support to climb up, and this should result in bigger, more mature leaves. This is exactly what is happening with my Adansonii here. You'll notice that the lower leaves are small, and they're getting progressively larger as it continues to climb up this trellis trellis. Well, this won't happen if you do it all wrong, like I did here with this philodendron lemon and lime. These plants will just not mature until they've got something to stick their teeth into. Look at what Mr. Adansonii is doing. He's grown these little area roots at each leaf node and attached itself to the trellis as if they were each little suction cups. This is exactly how it wants to grow. These plants are climbers in their natural habitat and latch onto the surrounding trees in the jungle to access more light at the top of the jungle. And they use these aerial roots to do the job. Yes, this is what those weird root things are for. So the trellis is acting like a tree in the jungle, and a pretty one at that. But the thing that has made this so successful with this plant is that I started the process early. This is absolutely key and something I just didn't comprehend for the longest time. It takes a long time for a plant to latch on. An annoyingly long time, truth be told, but it is what it is, I guess. They need to get all their ducks in a row, and even when they've latched on, it takes a while for it to start to mature. It's like it needs to develop a trusting relationship and have confidence that it's always going to be there and not yanked away and left in limbo. Looking at this guy, and really you could only call the latest 3 or 4 leaves remotely mature, so it is taking its sweet time, but that's fine, I'm a patient lad, sometimes. The trick is that I got this trellis in the pot nice and early when the plant was only a wee bubba, and this allowed it to become acquainted with the support and start latching on. And latched on it has. I tied it to the support at the beginning with some string, but since it started latching on, I've not needed to bother. It's not going anywhere. Now let's compare this to my philodendron lemon and lime. The mistake I made here was not adding the support early enough. The plant had already grown long stems, and to get it off the floor I just plonked this moss ball in the pot and haphazardly tied the long stems to it, not really knowing what I was doing. And I didn't learn my lesson either. I did the exact same thing with this Pothos Marble Queen. I plonked the trellis in when it already had long stems, and I'm having to keep on tying it on with string as it grows taller. What I should have done was cut it back, propagated the cuttings, put the trellis in and began tying the stems to it right at the base. This way the plant knows the support is there, it will be encouraged to latch its aerial roots onto the wood, and then we're away at the races when it comes to mature leaves. Look at this Pothos Devil's Ivy. This is a cutting I made a few months ago, and rather than waiting for the stems to grow long and then support it, I got this plank of wood in right at the beginning like a good boy. And look what's happening. The aerial roots are starting to latch on, and the leaves are already starting to size up. Brilliant! Isn't nature wonderful? The only problem, of course, is that this plank of wood is, shall we say, not too aesthetically pleasing. Mrs. Sheffield certainly isn't a fan anyway, that's putting it mildly. Now I've got this little Pothos Marble Queen here that I need to add support to, and for that I'm going to use another trellis because they kindly sent me one to try. Now, one of the most common tips you will hear in the plant world is to rotate your plants. You know, you want all sides to get their vitamin D so that they don't grow lopsided. My little green Syngonium is always leaning to the side like a smooth criminal, so I rotate him every few days to even him up. Do this to a staked plant though, and you're asking for trouble. You definitely don't want the backside to face the light. It will make the stems grow around the back where the light is, and then aerial roots won't be able to attach to the wood. You absolutely need it to face the light in the same direction all the time, no ifs or buts. But Mr. Sheffield, if I have a plant sat next to my window facing the light, the only thing I'd see is its scrawny behind and not the beautiful leaves. Where's the fun in that? Yes, a problem I can relate to, but one I've just come to terms with, to be honest. I've got climbers on my windowsill, and I've just accepted that the leaves aren't going to face the room. Not ideal, admittedly, but it doesn't stop me from enjoying them. I want them to get tons of light while they're sizing up, and I'll probably move them somewhere I can enjoy them more. If you're not a fan, then the only thing I can suggest is to have them up against a wall or something, so there's no need to rotate. I've positioned my Melanocrysis cutting in this way, and he's facing the light. I don't touch him. His leaves should grow big and beautiful, just like my Adansonia in my bedroom that I also don't touch. The only problem is that it's obviously not the brightest spot, so growth won't be turbocharged and the gaps between the leaves might start to get bigger. I guess it's a choice between fast growth and a scrawny behind, or slow growth and seeing the beautiful leaves all the time. I'll leave that with you, my plant friend. It might sound mad, but decapitating your plant can be one of the best things you do to it. I know what you're thinking, of course, but Mr. Sheffield, surely you'll kill it if you take off most of the foliage, won't you? Well, my plant friend, our green giants are surprisingly resilient, much more resilient than you take them for, and they pretty much always bounce back stronger than ever, don't you? I've done this to countless plants in the past and documented my crazy shenanigans on this channel, and I've even done it to my fiddle leaf fig. I brutally cut it in half for the Sheffies over on Patreon, and I'll explain why in this video, as well as show you the results just 3 months later. You might just be surprised. But before you scamper off and hack away at all your plants with gay abandon, there are a few things you need to know first. Hard and soft pruning. These are the two types of pruning in the plant world. Soft pruning is the gentler, kinder approach and involves removing the tips of stems or leaves to encourage the plant to grow bushier. It's the Mozart way of doing things. I recommend it all the time on my channel, of course. It works marvellously for plants like Tradescantia, Pothos and Philodendron, where a regular pinching of the tips of the stems encourages them to branch out and you end up with a super bushy plant you can be proud of. Hard pruning, on the other hand, is the braver but more rewarding approach that basically involves resetting a tired looking plant by removing large sections of it, such as entire branches or stems. It's the heavy metal way of doing things. I hard pruned my Ficus elastica Tineke last year, for example, and was left with just a stump with no leaves on it. You'd have thought I was mad, but it was all part of my cunning plan to get the best out of the little mister further down the line. Admittedly, it's a bit of a brutalist approach, but trust me, it can do wonders to a tired looking specimen. So why don't we just stop all the interfering and leave the little fella alone to live happily ever after and grow taller and taller and taller? Why bother with all the hard pruning? Well, there are a few reasons actually. First, there is disease. Plants are a lot like their often fussy guardians really, in that they sometimes get sick and contract a disease. You may be merrily soft pruning a rubber tree, for example, and accidentally introduce a germ or two to the plant because we didn't diligently give our pruners a clean first. Very naughty, and this can lead to every plant parent's worst nightmare, stem rot, with leaves turning yellow and dropping off and stems wilting and turning black and mushy. Not pretty. This problem will continue to spread down the plant until it eventually kills it. In this case, the best thing you can do to it is effectively amputate it, like you would a frostbitten toe, by cutting off all the stems until you reach healthy tissue. Sounds gruesome, I know, but removing diseased parts will actually stimulate new growth and encourage it to focus its energy on producing healthy limbs. The second reason is that you might just be sick of the sight of your little mister. It could be lopsided and growing heavily in one direction, or it could have bare sections that just make it look like you don't know what you're doing. In this case, a hard prune could be just the ticket. You can reset it and beg it to grow in an orderly fashion. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I'll show you both in a jiffy. Ficus and jades are perfect examples of this. I'm always at it with my jade plants, whether they like it or not. I have no fear whatsoever about cutting back large sections of the foliage if I'm not happy with the direction it is growing in. And the wonderful thing about jades is that they are so resilient and also very predictable. They always grow 2 new stems wherever we make a cut on the branch and respond brilliantly to a hard prune. And when I say they are predictable, I mean we can guarantee which direction the branches will grow. All we do is locate the next set of leaves down where we make the cut. This is where a pair of branches will grow, and they will always grow in a direction of the leaves. This means we can be strategic and shape our plant to our liking. So, 3 months ago, I decapitated my fiddle leaf fig for the Sheffies over on Patreon. This may look a bit drastic to you, but I just wasn't happy with how it was growing. It was becoming as lanky as yours truly, with a long central stem with no branching. I'm 6'6" if you didn't know. I wanted more of a tree-like structure with branches shooting off off lower down the plant. If I didn't act then, it will continue to grow tall with one stem, get top heavy, and generally look a bit silly. And we don't want our plants to look silly, do we? Also, the leaves were looking a little bit tired and droopy. This tends to happen with ficus plants as they get older and experience inconsistent watering and light. Not that that's what I'm doing, mind you. Their leaves do tend to drop if we forget to water them just once though, or even if they aren't receiving enough light, and once a ficus leaf starts to turn, there's no getting it back. So I lobbed it in half until I was left with just a stump and a few leaves so that it could still photosynthesize. I was hoping that it would produce 2 or more branches to create a nice tree-like structure, rather than having one central tall stem. You might be looking at your collection right now and dreaming of all the cuts you can make, but there is a caveat. Not all plants can be pruned in this way. I know, I'm sorry, but it's just the way it is. This kind of pruning should only be reserved for tree-like plants like Ficus, Croton and Dracena, as well as vining plants with stems such as Philodendron, Pothos and Tradescantia. It's much trickier to hard prune a Calafea or spider plant, for example, because they don't really grow from stems. Their leaves grow from rhizomes in the soil. You can of course prune away diseased or damaged leaves and the plant will respond by sending out new leaves, but it's not the same as cutting back a plant with a stem or trunk. So how do we prep the plant before pruning so that we don't end up killing it? This is actually pretty important. Pruning isn't a big deal in winter, especially soft pruning, but I would save the hard pruning for when the plant is actively growing in spring and summer. If you prune like this in the winter when it has slowed down its growth due to the shorter days, then you're just not going to see the results until spring when it wakes up. Cut it in spring and it will be dying to push out new stems and you'll see results much quicker. But if you live somewhere more exotic or you can still see growth, then prune away, my plant friend. Now obviously this is all a little stressful for our green little mister. I mean, you'd be pretty stressed if your head was Henry VIII, so ideally we should reduce this stress as much as possible. This simply means giving the plant a good drink a couple of days before pruning day so that it's well hydrated. The worst thing you can do is decapitate a dehydrated plant. It'll be very cross with you. And of course, make sure you're using clean pruners. There's no real need to sterilize or anything, just give them a wash with good old fairy liquid. And if you're pruning plants with lots of sap like ficus plants, then get ready for the copious amounts of sap that it bleeds. I wasn't prepared for this in my Patreon video, and you can see me rushing to grab the kitchen roll so it didn't end up going all over my kitchen. It is mildly toxic, so it's best to not do what I did and cut without wearing gloves. And don't add it to your Weetabix. The loo will be your best friend in that case. As you can see, there's nothing particularly taxing about cutting the plant in half. You can probably even go lower than I did. They tend to find the will to survive and always bounce back. They always grow back. You kind of just want to have an idea of where you want it to branch out and then just cut there. So, the moment you've all been waiting for. How's the plant looking now? Well, first and most importantly, as you can see, the plant isn't dead. Phew! Just proves that a plant will easily survive even if you cut away pretty much all its foliage. But look at that growth! You can see that it has successfully produced a bunch of new stems from just underneath where I made the cut. And this has actually shook me because I wasn't expecting it to send out 4 new stems. Lucky me! I've had it before where the plant has only sent out 1 new stem. I'm looking at you, Mr. Rubber. Sounded weird that. Anyway, to be honest, how many stems you actually get after making the cut is kinda luck of the draw. Sometimes you get 4 like with Mr. Fiddle here, and sometimes it's just 1. What I should have done with Mr. Rubber is cut him back again to see if it would fall into line and grow multiple stems. Oh well, maybe next time. After you've done the deed, give it tons of light. Put it in the brightest spot in your home and even consider shining a Scentsy grow light over it. It needs as much light as possible to photosynthesize and turn energy into growth. A lack of light will seriously delay new shoots from appearing, and we don't want that. Second, keep it properly hydrated like you normally would. Don't let it dry out, and certainly don't be too keen and overwater it. Healthy roots are important now because it's relying on them to get over the shock of having its head cut off. And I wouldn't bother fertilizing it until new shoots are a few inches long. Adding nitrogen risks the plant sending out new spindly growth too quickly rather than taking its time to push out strong new growth. I've got this sedum here living on my bedroom windowsill, and for the longest time it confused the bejesus out of me. I think I probably bought it from IKEA about 4 years ago without doing any reading about how it grows or what it likes. I know, criminal isn't it? So I popped it in its ceramic pot and left it to live its best life in the brightest spot in my house. What a doting plant parent. Well, maybe not actually. The thing is, I kept noticing that the bleeding thing kept trying to escape the pot it was living in. "Why won't you grow normal?" I kept yelling at him, the poor sucker. I was expecting him to grow upwards like a normal plant, but all I was doing was displaying my inherent noobiness. If I'd actually read a little bit about this guy on the internet, then I would have found out that he has a sprawling, trailing growth habit, i.e. he doesn't want to grow up in a straight line at all. He wants to hang like the Fonz. And it's obvious now that I look at him, since that fateful day of me enlightening my tiny brain, I've left him to do his sprawling thing rather than tying him up a stick against his will and yelling him to grow upwards. And we're in a much better place now, thankfully. Look, he's pushing all his neighbours out of the way so he can stretch. The moral of this story is that not all plants grow the way you expect. They don't all want to grow upwards like you might assume. The Monstera deliciosa is a case in point. If you've not got this gal tied up to a stick or something, then our natural inclination is to leave the pot and sprawl all over your floor like a middle-aged man trying to do yoga for the first time. So don't fight it, my plant friend. Let it do its thing. Check out this baby-face Monstera I've got growing in my dining room. Looking pretty good, isn't he? How about this Ficus elastica Tineke that happily sits on my living room windowsill? Seems happy with his lot in life too, doesn't he? Well, what do these two fellas have in common? I'll give you a couple of seconds. Yes, you spotted it. Neither of them are living in soil. They are both making home in a pot of just perlite. Yes, just perlite. In case you didn't know, perlite is just a super lightweight volcanic rock that we add to soil to make it lighter. In other words, it's plant gold. Now, it took me absolutely ages to come to the realization that our green buddies don't necessarily have to live in soil. I'm going back to my newbie days again when I was just starting out on my indoor jungle journey. Sometimes plants grow better in something entirely different. Just look at the Lecker Queen's channel. Her plants are thriving, and I think you can guess what her plants are living in. So don't confine yourself to soil. Have a little play with other materials. I bought these two monstrosities of an alocasia a couple of months back and popped them both into just perlite. Honestly, this wasn't my doing. They looked like a dog's dinner when I bought them, I promise. Alocasias in particular benefit from a super light soil mix, so I'm experimenting with them living in just perlite, and you can just start to see I'm reaping the rewards of that change. So stay tuned for more updates about their progress this year. That means subscribe to the channel, by the way. Right. Have you ever gone to water your green pals on a Saturday morning, only after checking each of them with your trusty moisture meter of course, noticed water droplets on the ends of the leaves and panicked that your plants are dying from overwatering? I mean, what is that? Is it a sign from God that you should just pack all this indoor jungle thing in? Are those droplets on the ends of the leaves a bad thing? Well, this, my plant friend, is called guttation. It's a process in plants where water is released from the tips or edges of leaves, and this occurs mainly at night when the stomata, which are the tiny pores on the surface of the leaves, are closed, preventing the plant from releasing water through transpiration. So basically, instead of transpiration, water in the cells is forced out through the leaf margins. But is it bad? Well, while it can be a sign that you are giving your plant too much water, as I'll explain in a bit, most of the time it's just a natural process that is pretty much harmless. I notice it tends to happen to lots of my green friends the morning after I've given them a good drink, and in this case it's nothing to worry about. If it is happening all the time to the same plant, then chances are you are indeed giving it too much water. The root system is flooded and the plant is trying to get rid of it any which way it can. So dial it back and become reacquainted with your moisture meter. This stuff here can make your plants seriously grumpy. And no, I'm not simply hating on the brand. Let me explain. This is of course an all-purpose fertiliser, just like this and so many others on the market, and if you're a good guardian you'll be giving your little green misters a taste every other week or so. The problem is though, is that they say they are all-purpose when this is in fact a little white lie. They're not really all-purpose, they're one purpose, leafy growth purpose. You see, Miracle-Gro is packed with nitrogen, and nitrogen is the gas that powers leafy growth. But what if you don't particularly want leafy growth? What if you have, let's say, a peace lily and you want it to do the thing that it hardly ever wants to do? Yeah, flower. In that case, besides praying, you need a feed that is high in phosphorus, like this particular version of Miracle-Gro. All-purpose feeds tend to be quite low in phosphorus, which might explain why your peace lily never ever flowers. You get the point. Maybe, just maybe, if you give it the right feed, you have a fighting chance of getting it to bloom again. Maybe. When you have a look at my plant collection, you'll probably notice that a lot of my green friends are sat on my windowsills. How can this be, Mr. Sheffield? Plants fry in the sun, surely. Well, there are a couple of reasons for this. Now, this might be a little controversial, but most plants can soak up more vitamin D than we tend to give them credit for. Read any book on the matter and you'll be scared into never letting a single ray of sunshine ever touch the leaves. But this is a big opportunity missed, in my opinion. The single biggest factor that will turn your little guy into the rock is light. And depriving him of sunlight means he'll be more machinist than rock. So have a cheeky experiment. If you want to prove me wrong and see if I'm talking a load of baloney, then start upping the time he spends on the sunbed. You might just be pleasantly surprised. But the second reason I can do this is because I live in the rainy armpit of the UK, Sheffield. That's where the name comes from, by the way. I'm not literally called Mr. Sheffield. Anyway, there's just not much sun to be had around here, let me tell you. And when it does show its feeble face, it's a little bit puny to say the least. So be sensible. If you live in the desert, experiment, but be cautious. And what is the one word that is sacred in the plant community? Yes, you guessed it, humidity. Plants need 1000% humidity, right? Well, in my experience, not so much. Don't get me wrong, they love a bit of high humidity, no doubt, but the thing that upsets them most is inconsistent humidity. Many folks complain that their new plant looks like a shambles as soon as they bring it home from the store and blame it on the dry air in their home. In reality though, it's the change in humidity that is causing all the grief. You might think I'm splitting hairs, but there's an important distinction to be made. Blaming the dry air assumes that the plant will never be happy, but it's my theory that once a plant becomes accustomed to your home, it will be fine. Look at these Philodendron verrucosum plants I've got. Looking pretty good, aren't they? Not a blemish. Yet. Well, they are all offspring of their dearly departed mother, who looked like a dog's dinner when I got her last year, and this was all because she was homesick and needed time to settle in, bless her. The moral of the story is, don't chuck them in the bin when it all goes wrong. Give them consistency and they will learn to adapt. Look at the state of this plant. On death's door, isn't he, the poor little mister? Well, the thing is, this is all by design. Yes, you heard me correct. This is all a not so mad little experiment I'm doing to get the absolute best out of him further down the line. And if you have this plant, I recommend you do the same. This is Ox, my apparently dead Oxalis triangularis, otherwise known as purple shamrock. When in rude health, this guy is an absolute stunner, with beautiful, delicate purple leaves and tiny pink and white flowers. The trouble is, getting it in rude health can be a bit of a challenge. Usually it looks like a straggly mess in my house. Well, that was until I discovered this nifty little trick for getting the absolute best out of it. And the best part is, you get to watch your little purple buddy rise like the second coming of you-know-who and nurture him like the plant parent you always dreamed you'd be. Very rewarding. So what's the deal then? How on earth does killing this plant get the best out of it? Surely I've gone mad, right? Well, firstly, this isn't actually killing the plant. It's sending it into a forced dormancy. Think of dormancy like hibernation, but for plants. Just like a big grizzly will stop terrorizing the woods during the winter months and take a giant nap to conserve energy, lots of plants will do pretty much the same thing. And they always come out stronger on the other side. Alocasias are known for this, of course, but so too are oxalises. It tends to happen with plants that grow from bulbs in the soil. The leaves die back to allow the bulbs to conserve energy during the lack of light and warmth of winter, and come spring new leaves emerge and the plant is all the better for it. Now this doesn't actually happen every year with oxalis. They normally muddle through for a few years before giving up one year with the leaves dying back. But I have found that forcing it into dormancy at the end of every summer, especially in my dark and cold climate, results in a better plant the following spring and summer. And I'm going to show you the full process from dormancy to new life next year. So how do we even force dormancy without killing it then? Well, thankfully it's dead easy. excuse the pun. You literally stick it somewhere cool and dark and forget it exists for months. What's easier than that, eh? Maybe you do that already with a couple of plants, but this time it's all by design, with no guilt. Yay! So carry on with the plant even if you do get some funny looks from his friends. You know better than them. Mrs. Sheffield nearly threw mine out thinking I'd killed yet another plant, but luckily I stopped her just in time. Phew! I keep mine behind my telly in my living room because it's a nice dark and cool spot for it to just do its thing, but Mrs. Sheffield just assumed I'd messed up again. And don't water it during this time. Doing so will wake it up and we don't want that. It should basically look as bad as it possibly can. A true beast from all your worst nightmares. And you'll see just how dry the soil of mine is in a jiffy. So I moved mine to the lonely corner when it starts to look like a straggly mess at the end of summer. It might be a bit different for you based on your climate, but it's normally October for me. Basically, when you're sick of the sight of it, send it to the naughty corner for it to chill out. You'll see the leaves go crispy and gnarly and it will look like an absolute dog's dinner. You might be tempted to cancel the experiment and try and nurture it back to life early, but trust me, leave it as it is until spring. He'll thank you for it. Right, getting it out of dormancy is when the fun really begins and you can start to get some pride and joy out of your work. I start this process at the end of winter or very early spring, normally around the end of February. There's no hard and fast rule here though, it will depend on where you live. I just like to give it a chance to rise from its slumber nice and early so that I can enjoy the foliage for longer in summer. So it's about 4 months after I sent this bad boy to sleep. And as you can see, mine looks like an abomination. A true specimen of how not to look after your plant. But this is fine, it's how it's meant to look, trust me. What's the Sheffield Mayplants mantra? They always grow back, they always grow back. Now remove the leaves and whatnot because we're not keeping any of that. Tip it over and empty the contents onto a tray or something. And look at just how dry this soil is. My oh my, drier than the Sahara, crunchier than a bar of crunchy. Anyway, you now need to sift through the debris and collect all the little bulbs that have been lying dormant for months. How many you've got will depend on how old your plant is and whether it's had a chance to grow lots in the soil. And the beauty of these things is that it really doesn't matter if they break apart a bit. They'll still be viable bulbs just fine, so no need to be too delicate. And sift through the soil carefully, you don't want to miss any. That would be a waste. Lob everything into the bin, apart from the bulbs of course. And then grab some nice fresh soil and fill up your pot about halfway. And make sure your pot has drainage holes. You really don't want these guys sat in a swamp. Now just simply pop the bulbs in and top up with more soil so the pot is nice and full. You can of course pot up into multiple pots to get more individual plants, but I found you do need a fair few bulbs to get a decently bushy plant. Not enough and it will look a bit sparse, so I'm chucking everything into the same pot. Plus I haven't got the space for any more plants anyway. And don't fret about which way is up and which way is down either. The plant somehow figures this out itself. Just chuck them in and let nature do its thing. Give the whole thing a good drink so that all the soil is nice and wet and pop it somewhere nice and bright. I'm putting mine under these Sansi grow lights because I'm actually starting this process earlier than I should to get this video out in time. And Sansi grow lights really do make things nice and easy. From that point, don't be too carefree with the watering. And that just means don't keep watering every couple of days and keeping the soil soggy. They don't particularly like wet soil. It can actually send them back into dormancy somehow. I'm not sure how, but that's what I read. Just keep the soil moist, and that means watering when the soil has dried out somewhat. I use my trusty moisture meter of course, which is listed in my Amazon store by the way, and I water when the probe reads 2. Best invention ever by the way. For gardening folk anyway. Now it's just a case of playing the waiting game and celebrating a new life when it shows its face. And through the power of TV, let's go back to the future for an update from future Mr. Sheffield. Thank you very much Marty. In truth, I didn't have to go that far into the future because this is only 2 weeks later and we can already see the first signs of life. I just love the way these things pop out from the soil. They almost look like swans dipping their heads into the water. How poetic. When you see this only a couple of weeks after repotting it, you know you're onto a good thing. Just another week later and those 2 swans have been joined by some of their buddies and are now showing themselves off fully. So we're looking pretty good. Having it under these grow lights really does allow them to put a growth spurt on. Right, I've teased you enough. Let's fast forward some more to show you the finished article. And boom, here we are just 2 weeks later, and my oh my, what a specimen we have here. Tons of growth has come out and we now have a lovely full bushy oxalis, exactly what we wanted. Let me know what you think in the comments. I must say, this guy is one of my favourites when in rude health. And the funky thing about this plant is what it does at night time. It closes its leaves up like it's going to sleep and then wakes up again in the morning. Pretty neat. I like to sit there on an evening and watch him do it. It's the small things that make my life interesting, I guess. And look, you can start to see the flowers already coming through too. That's when you know you're a true plant Jedi master, my plant friend. A word of caution when you get to this point though. They hate to have wet feet. Keep them in soggy soil and you risk them going back into dormancy prematurely. So be careful with your watering. Now, if you always find that your plants tend to suck during the winter like mine, then you might be surprised to know that it's not normally because of the cold. And in this video, I explain what it actually is, so check it out.